What's up, everybody? This is the Ikesinspirations podcast, and today I have a great guest named Spencer Carpenter. Spencer is the owner of Outlier Audio, and he has booked over 1,000 people for our podcast. And today I would love to have him on because I'm interested as a podcaster how he gets these guests and how he provides value for his clients. So, Spencer, it's a great pleasure having you on. Can you please do us the favor of introducing yourself to the audience and briefly describing who you are and your story?
Yeah, Ike, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And so as you said, like I'm a podcast booking agent, and I specialize in real estate investors, specifically getting them booked on quality interviews because whether they're raising money or trying to increase deal flow or just trying to get their name out there, there's always a need for going out there. But also real estate investors are people that aren't afraid to give away their information, so it's a great community to be able to support. And I also work with a bunch of other high-performing entrepreneurs outside of real estate as well. But real estate is kind of where I got my start with it and where I focus a lot.
Yeah, I know you started from the music industry, which is pretty cool. I'm a huge fan of music, hip-hop and R&B specifically. And I'm just curious to learn what made you choose to pivot from music into your booking agency?
Yeah, so I started in the music industry when I was 15, just booking concerts in my little farm town. And then as I got older, I moved out to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I ran a small record label for someone, and I ran a music conference and festival and some small venues and stuff like that. Mostly working with metal bands, but also some hip hop as well. I worked with like P&B Rock a little bit.
Cool.
Very briefly was in Europe with 6ix9ine for like a week.
Dude, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was a cool experience. But yeah, I mean, with P&B Rock, I toured with him like on the.
Oh, rest in peace to him, man. Rest in peace to him.
It's a real shame.
Yeah.
Real shame.
Sorry, how did you get to see Tekashi 6ix9ine? What was that like?
Honestly, it was dude, he's just a kid, man. He's just a kid thrown into fame,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bummer how it all went down, but like, it is what it is. He's all right now. I think he's down in Puerto Rico and he's living his best life.
Yeah. Well, that's cool, man. I used to, before I podcasted, I used to blog, and I had a blog called Music for Inspiration. I switched it to Ike's Inspiration, but I used to blog about a lot of hip-hop and R&B artists, and it was similar to the spirit of this podcast, where it was intended to inspire people through podcasts, but I have a lot more curiosity outside of just music, so I wanted to do other stuff. But P&B Rock actually used to follow my blog, and it was cool, so I don't have a strong relationship with him, but rest in peace to him, and I hope he's in a better place. So with that being said, man, I'm curious to learn, how long have you had your booking agency for, and how were you able to book over 1,000 people for your podcast?
Yeah, so I started back in July of 2020, so just coming on 4 years. And I guess I'll just correct the numbers. I've booked over 1,500 interviews for probably 250 entrepreneurs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so, and it's just been being able to build up relationships with people, sometimes be able to revisit shows with new clients and that kind of thing. But through working in music and doing sponsorship and that kind of thing, even though I'm not an English major by any means, in fact, grammatically, I'm incorrect all the time, but I'm really good at writing still. I'm really good at creating a compelling email. I've actually looked at my skill set oftentimes as how to write a really good email. And so not being afraid to email people and get rejected and just, trying to lay out the best case possible is kind of been how I started all of this. And I just looked at it as, my job used to be trying to convince a venue owner in St. Louis, Missouri to open up their club on a Tuesday for some no-name metal bands.
Yeah.
This is a lot easier. There's no money negotiation. There's no overhead costs for having someone on the show. And so I just when the concept hit me, or actually a friend recommended, this is something I look into. We didn't know if anybody did it. And I just concluded, like, if someone pays me for this service to get started, I'll email 200 podcasts till 5 say yes. Like, I'll just keep going. I'm sure I'll figure it out. And luckily it turned out to be something that people needed, and hosts seemed to like working with me.
Yeah, man. I can imagine working in the podcast world versus the music industry. It's much easier.
Much easier.
I know something about artists is they tend to have a lot of ego. And quite frankly, it's kind of one of the reasons why I stopped blogging about hip hop and music. There was a lot of reasons, but I felt like the conversations felt the same. And in hip hop in particular, everyone thinks like they're the greatest artists in the world. And although I still aspire to have some guests on like Kendrick Lamar and stuff, I didn't want to have to deal with that ego all the time, so I'm not as interested as doing that. And I would imagine you probably came across that ego a lot where you're trying to book people and they probably think they're the greatest artists of all time or something, right? I would imagine.
Yeah, well, there's definitely much less ego in the entrepreneurship space. And look, there is still some, but more often than not, it's actually earned. There's a reason why they're a little bit egotistical, or maybe it's just because they've learned enough about personal development that they're just confident. Whereas, yes, there are some artists that have no reason to be as confident and egotistical as they are.
Yeah.
They're just trying to fake it till they make it, and you can't blame them for that. But yeah, it's much easier in dealing with entrepreneurs, and more than anything, just dealing with adults. And when it comes to problem solving, entrepreneurs know how to solve problems. So let's just say they are failing to find the link to the podcast, in time for the interview. They know how to go ask. They're not scared to reach out to the host or reach out to me and ask for it. Whereas with artists, you're kind of, you're herding cats and babying them sometimes. So this is definitely a lot easier.
I have a friend who works in the music industry, and he tells me stories of how he's a manager and his artists will come late to studio times or whatever, and he feels like he's a babysitter. So it's funny to hear you say that, and I'm sure you know all too well how that feels like. So my next question for you is, what have you learned from booking guests on your podcast?
I mean, there definitely learned a lot of different things. I mean, let me ask, what are you asking, what are some tips to get booked on more podcasts or what? I guess, I can specify. I would be so for people who may be interested in, either getting on shows, or what advice would you have for people who are looking to get on a show or be booked for a podcast? Yeah. So off the bat, a lot of people question whether or not they qualify, and I would say there are shows of all types. So let's just say for real estate investing, there are shows that are meant for people that have done less than 10 deals. It's what have you learned? How did you do this as a beginner? And then there are shows that are more advanced. But that's to say that if you've done 3 deals, there are shows out there that'll have you. But you want to be able to put into words a little bit about what you learned. And you can't you can't submit yourself to a podcast and say, I can speak about entrepreneurship. I can speak about investing in real estate. It's what can you speak about? And in the beginning, that might be you being vulnerable and saying, here are all the ways I fucked up my first investment. That is the story. That's the value you can provide. Most of the real estate podcasts I've been on so far have been to talk about I've only done a few deals, and the first one was a major, it had a lot of problems. That's what I've been on real estate podcasts to talk about, was my failed first project. And I'm okay with that. I learned stuff, and I learned that, I've also found that from being vulnerable about it, there are lots of people that learned from that, and they reached out and connected. I've made friendships that way.
Yeah. I often ask a lot of people to join my podcast, and some of them I would notice have some form of imposter syndrome where they'll be like, oh, I'm not really successful yet, or I haven't done X, Y, and Z. And I always tell them that's okay, man. Like, I think where you are in your journey, everyone can learn from something, whether that be the mistakes, like you mentioned, there's like different kinds of podcasting. And I know you watch the Bigger Pockets podcast, and I used to watch it often, not as much, but I do know, like there's the Bigger Pockets podcast, and then there's like the rookie section, which I tend to find a little bit more relatable for me, because I don't have a huge portfolio, but I'm starting to build that. So just like there's podcasts avenues for everyone.
Yeah. When I was just trying to get a lay of the land and understand the whole industry, I listened to the main podcast a lot. But once I started flipping and actually buying deals, I started shifting to the rookie podcast, because I found there was more information that was specific to exactly where I'm at in my process. The Bigger Pocket, the main one, was good for seeing the possibilities and getting me motivated. But for tactical advice for someone like me, the rookie podcast was better. So that's if you get paid to do something, no matter what it is, you have insight into your industry, into the nuance of it that other people don't have. And that goes from being a real estate investor to being like a cook at like a real restaurant. Like restaurants have salaries, not just hourly workers. You learn things that other people don't know. And you have stories you can share. You have insights you can share, and just industry information and niche specific information that is valuable to other people. You just have to find the place, like where the people that want that information are hanging out. And there are podcasts for all of it. There are podcasts for dog groomers and dog walkers. There's only like 20 of them, and like 10 of them are defunct. But like there are podcasts dedicated to dog grooming. There's podcasts for everything.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauty of podcasting. There's so many nuanced, different perspectives that you can get, and it's a great opportunity to just learn more about people's stories, learn more about entrepreneurship, learn more about personal development, and just kind of become a better human being. That's honestly why I started this podcast. I get to meet incredible people like you, and just learn and get other people's perspectives on how they like view life or do things. So it kind of gives me a more clearer perspective on how I can move forward. So my next question for you, Spencer, is what would you say, like, why do your clients come to you? Like, what value do you provide to them that allows them to trust you with their money and their time?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I had already spent a lot of time listening to shows like Bigger Pockets, I knew the language, I knew the concept of real estate investing, and I knew what stories I had heard before and what I hadn't, what strategies I had already heard about and what I hadn't. And so I was able to work with people in that regard. But, I also work with people outside of real estate, and I manage several types of businesses in music. I had a merchandising business. I had a ticketing business. I've done Uber. I've done DoorDash. I've done dog sitting. I've been a nanny.
Oh, cool.
I've pretty much all of my adult life, I've only had a W-2 income for about 9 months. Wow. I mean, I always say I've successfully been unemployed most of my adult life, and I've always been intrigued in how people make money. When I was working in the record label, there was I was getting an album release ready, and the person who was teaching me how to take over the label was like, you need to go get a barcode. And I never considered, like, you have to get barcodes for products. Yeah. And there was one company, he's like, go to this website to get the barcode for the album. And the website said, we are the #1 barcode producer in the world. And I'm like, wow, what like a stupid thing to say out loud, but like it's your success. They're probably millionaires, It's like what weird thing to say out loud. Yeah. Like, I'm the #1 ice chest producer on the East Coast. Not sexy whatsoever, but you make money. Yeah. And that was something that, like, in that moment, I was like, wow, there's so many ways to be successful. And so I work with tons of different types of entrepreneurs, and I love learning about all of the ways they make money, how they have found success, how they scaled, how they grew. I mean, I could talk to 3 different people in the exact same industry, but they all succeeded in completely different ways. And I think that my, innate interest in how people find success and how they build their businesses leads to me being a good representative for them, because not only do I craft topics to present to host from my perspective, how did you tell me about the ice chest business? Like, what is there to know? Are there only a few of you that do this?
Yeah.
Is it franchise? Like, I know how to ask all those questions that someone that just decided to do this as a gig or a job would have no interest in taking it further. You know, they don't know how to ask those questions. They don't know what questions to ask. And so I just think that I can kind of see things closer to their level than someone else. And I can also see crossovers because I have exposures to all different types of things. I see the crossovers in other areas that they might not. So, for example, I worked with a franchise consultant for a while, and initially he just wanted to be on podcasts to get in front of people with money that could maybe start a franchise. And then I remember listening to a guy on Bigger Pockets that bought strip malls and was talking about how he was opening a laundromat in one of his strip malls to stabilize the commercial loan and fill a vacancy. And so I went back to my franchise guy and I said, do you work with real estate investors? He's like, no. Why? I'm like, well, one, they always want to diversify into businesses. And two, if they have commercial spaces, they might want to fill their vacancies with a commercial, with a franchise. Or they have a management company. So if they start a pest control franchise, they can go to their management company and say, we'll give you a sweetheart deal if you make us your number one pest person. And so they just immediately can build this business off of their relationships in real estate. So the franchise consultant had no idea this was an option. And he's by then positioning his pitch about how real estate investors can diversify into these cash flowing businesses, but it can also build a relationship within their real estate business. He's been able to find tons of clients from going on real estate shows, and he had no idea. So that's the kind of knowledge I kind of bring to the table a little bit that just someone that's too close to it might not see.
And as you were talking, the thing that kept popping in my head is the riches is in the niches, and the riches is in the niches. And
Exactly.
oftentimes the most boring company is the one that makes the most money. And unlike how social media can present these things as being so flashy, it's usually the boring things. I don't know whether it be the laundromat business or just some type of boring manufacturer business. I find those to be where the riches are at, but it doesn't get the clicks, it doesn't get the views, because the real valuable thing is really boring. You might be sending emails all day, or you might be just doing a bunch of outreach, but no one wants to hear that story. You know what I'm saying? Everyone wants to be
Exactly.
oh, how did you get to the jet, or how are you flying? No one wants to really talk about what it took to get there. And it's actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because I'm more interested in the work it took you to get there than the actual, oh, look, I'm a billionaire. Okay, cool. So that is cool to hear you talk about that. Something that you said, that as you were growing up, you talked about, you were a dog sitter, and you pretty much were switching to a bunch of different avenues. And now you're a podcast booking agent. At the time when you've kind of been unemployed for a while, how did that feel? And do you have stability now? Do you like where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, I chose to not get a job. I did what it took for me to pay the bills on my own terms. I mean, that was a choice I made. And look, I mean, I didn't become a millionaire doing that, but I was able to pay off debt by finding jobs where I could make $25 an hour instead of working in a warehouse for $15 an hour. I knew about trying to be frugal and putting in the time if I wasn't going to go back to college like my family wanted, and if I wasn't going to get a real job, I had to put in work in other areas. And I'm glad, being self-employed can have its ups and downs. There can be slow times in business. I mean, I'm currently going through kind of a slow time, but I know enough from all the things I've done to figure out how I can spin up new business. What are new things I can try? Where are angles I'm missing? Like I can take control of my destiny. And, I do the one thing I did learn a lot of in music, even though it was an industry that didn't pay that much, I learned how to survive in a way that most people don't. I learned how to look for opportunity. And I mean, look, I do not want to live a life where I have to piecemeal, 5 different one-off jobs together from different things, but I know how to if I have to. And that's really valuable to me.
Yeah, so it seems like from your experience in the music industry and doing all those job searchings, you've gained the character of perseverance and grit, which kind of allows you to do a lot more.
The music industry is full of that, and most of the business world has no idea. I mean, I worked with tons of like people in metal and hardcore that face, throat, hand tattoos all around, but they have more business sense than people with MBAs, and
really
they know how to trust. They know how to develop skills because they had to. And same thing in music. I mean, one of the funniest things about working with like P&B Rock and getting into hip hop is figuring out how it was different, because that industry, like those artists did not trust the industry. Yeah. And so in traditional music, traditional music industry stuff, it would be like, are you familiar with what back end is? A promoter profit. Yep. It's like if the show does well, you get a bonus.
Yeah.
I remember us first trying to book hip hop shows, and
cool.
them saying like, it's this much money, it's $25,000. And we're like, well, we'll give you $15,000 if the show does well, we'll do the bonus. And they're like, no, it's going to do well. You can give us $25,000. And that's, we're not going to work off the bonus. You're going to give us $25,000 or we're not coming. And they were so, that street smart stuff came out in a way that was like, they just put all the mainstream people in their place. And it was so funny to watch. Even when it was happening to us, we're like, kind of got to give them props. Like, they're smart. They're like, why would we deal with back end when we can just tell you that you need to pay us $10,000 more up front?
Yeah. And it seems like, and that kind of leads to the power of social media. Back in the day, a lot of hip hop artists and just a lot of artists, the only way for them to get on was through some TV or some gatekeeper that prevents you from really letting your artistry or music get out. Now with social media, you're your own brand, so you can just kind of create that for yourself, which is good to hear, man. So another question that I have for you is, I'm just curious to hear from your perspective, because I know you've done some podcasts, but you've also set up a lot of entrepreneurs to do podcasting yourself. So I'm curious to learn from you. What do you find the value of podcasting in your perspective?
Oh man, there's so many. I do whole podcast interviews on just this topic. I mean, so from like a guest perspective, you get unique SEO. And, SEO is important, especially like, going back to real estate or whatever. I mean, whether it's you're a business professional, you're raising money, whatever it means. If someone Googles your name, they'll easily find your website, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, all of these places you wrote great things about yourself.
Yeah.
Podcasts are a place where other people wrote good things about you. And that provides a lot of, credibility. I was just talking to someone today about it. He mentioned if his name gets Googled, people are going to see all the results. They're probably not going to listen to a single episode. Yeah. However, it was the differentiator that really quickly showed them he's not a newbie.
Yeah.
He's been around. And you don't have to become celebrity status. You don't have to become Mark Cuban for people to know you're credible. They just need to see you're credible within your circle and your industry. And so from a guest perspective, that's why you would make a concerted effort, even if you're new or, not huge, don't have a $100 million portfolio yet. That's why you still go on podcasts. You want people to see that you have some credibility, but you get SEO. Every interview you do is content that you can repurpose. After this interview, within a week, my VA is going to reach out to you and ask for the video so we can create social media content, because I don't want to make content. I'm not a social media guy. I don't like it. It's really uncomfortable for me. So, but I can talk to you all day. Mm-hmm. And so if I can take the conversation that you and I have and repurpose it, it took a whole task off of my hands. And from my perspective, like, you put together the whole resource, like, you paid for this. I get to use it for free.
Yeah.
There's, and then obviously you and I now have a relationship. If you have a listener that wants to reach out to me, I can build relationships that way. It's just like, you can go and be active on Instagram. You can be active on LinkedIn. You can run ads on Facebook. Like, you can do all these things, but they take a lot of time and they take a lot of money. And once that money is spent, the ad is done running. But your podcast is going to continue to grow. And I can continue to use the content from this podcast month after month after month. And I can check in with you every 3 months saying, do you know anybody that could use my service? Like, you're now a referral source for me, and vice versa. Yeah. And so it's a really cool medium. And even more than that, it's just the ability to build rapport with you, but also the listener. Yeah. I mean, how much money does like Pepsi pay for 30 seconds during the Super Bowl? Like, it's an insane amount because they know that time is valuable. And I'm not comparing this podcast to time at the Super Bowl, but like, if big companies could get 45 minutes with us, how valuable would that be to them? Yeah. And instead, like, we, the individuals, get this time with each other and listeners. And it's just really valuable time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was awesome to hear your perspective on it, especially hearing you talk about, like, you can use this as like a referral and like a lead generation system. And and ultimately, I think the key point, like the ability to strengthen relationships. I'll talk about my personal values I get from podcasting. And I think for me, I think it changes my self-image of myself. Before I started this podcast, I still identify as an introvert, but my ability to communicate with people is so much more better. And I feel so much more confident about myself. And the way I view myself is so much more of I'm a lot more impressed with myself. So I have a lot more self-respect for myself. And I'm also just practicing the ability to show up on a consistent basis. I podcast once a week. And I think, whether I'm not getting a huge load of money from doing this, but just creating that habit of showing up for yourself once a week. Doesn't even have to be in podcasts. It could be anything. It could be real estate, it could be whatever business you're doing. I just kind of want to keep doing that because I know, over time, that's how greatness happens, So, my last question.
Well, dude, I mean, I'll just say real quick, like, congratulations on like building up that confidence from doing it. Thank you. I'm similar. Like, I actually just this past week started making videos on LinkedIn, and that's not something I'm comfortable with, but cool. I drafted up like a course for podcast booking, and I was like, all right, you know what? I've done this before. I can do this for LinkedIn right now. And just in that exercise, I'm much more confident and prepared to do this when I have to. Yes. And similar to what you were saying about being an introvert, I say that to people all the time. Like, who are podcasts right? Who can be a guest on a podcast? Anyone. Yes. Because even introverts have to have one-on-one conversations, and they're usually okay with one-on-one conversations. Same. There's no listeners right now. There will be listeners in the future, but right now it's just you and me. And anybody can do that one-on-one conversation. And so, anyway, just congratulations.
Oh, I love it, man.
Like, showing up and staying consistent with it and just building that up for yourself.
Thank you, man. And congratulations on you for putting yourself out in LinkedIn, man. Another cool thing about podcasting is all the skills you get, you kind of become a better marketer, you become a better communicator, and you just start to build this personal brand that you're telling your own story uniquely and having other people, like you said, tell the story. And in addition to that, the type of relationships that you're able to build with incredible people. I've had real estate investors with a net worth over $100 million, and like now I can reach out to them if I have any questions about that, I can ask. Or honestly, I kind of use this podcast, to be honest, as like a little trick to like whatever I'm trying to do in life, like
to get in touch with the people that can help you.
Yes. So, I'm also a DJ, and I'm like, okay, I want to learn about DJing. Let me just invite some DJs onto this podcast and learn the art of DJing.
So on the side, I have a photo booth rental business, and I've done that for 7 years, but I've never developed any referral business. And so I said to my partner the other day, we're going to start a podcast called Wedding Pros. And I'm just going to invite on the wedding planners in the 60-mile radius of where I live to build that rapport with them. Like, I've emailed them. I've said I'd love to be a refer vendor for them. But you know how I'm going to build more rapport with them other than setting up a 10-minute call is by inviting them on my podcast where I get to highlight them and I provide value to them, give them that. And then who's going to be the first person they call when their next client says they need a photo booth? It's going to be me.
Spencer. And you want to know what the cool thing about podcasting is? I think it's such a genuine way to build relationships. I think oftentimes, in this whole social media and just being in America, everything is being marketed. Buy this, do this, buy this. I don't even know who you are, bro. Why are you doing all of this? Where with a podcast, like I'm talking to you for an hour. I'm not asking of you of anything. I don't care if you give me anything. I'm not expecting anything. But I think that kind of makes whatever that comes out of it a lot more authentic,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the main thing the main topic I pitch when I'm pitching to be on a podcast is what I call the no pitch scenario. It's right. You asked me about my business. I got to tell people what my business is. I wasn't trying to sell anybody. You asked me.
Yeah.
I just explained. And now if someone's looking to get booked on podcasts, they know that there's someone out there that they can help. And maybe they don't want to work with me. Maybe they just want to do it themselves. And that's fine. But they know that I exist now. And at least in terms of B2B podcasts, that's what makes us so valuable, is it's an opportunity to showcase yourself. But think about real estate agents. Real estate, there are obviously some that are great at what they do, but a lot of them do very similar things.
Yes.
And in your hometown, the way they differentiate themselves is billboards and bus signs and stuff like that, all this paid media. But what they really should be doing is finding a way to do content like this where they can explain to someone I'm a realtor because when I was a kid, my family, we had a really hard time finding a realtor to help that was on our side, someone that wasn't just chasing our commission. Or maybe it's someone that's maybe they were an immigrant family and only the kids knew how to speak English and they couldn't find a realtor that understood their parents. And they're so I want to be the Spanish speaking realtor in my town. That completely changes someone's perception of why they do their job. It's not just a job. There's history behind it. There is, I don't want to say passion. Not everyone is passionate about what they do, but there's a reason why they learned what they learned and why they do what they do. And I just think that this is a great medium for people to be able to do that.
Yeah. And you can, you can never outwork relationships. That's one thing I'm learning as I'm doing this podcast, this power in relationships. And this podcasting platform allows people to express themselves in a nuanced manner. I feel like oftentimes when we speak to people, just think about it. When you're talking to somebody, you're only speaking to them for 30 seconds. Most people, when you meet you don't really have these long conversations where you really get to know someone deeply. The conversation lasts 30 seconds, 1 minute. And for me, I'm not really a fan of small talk. So I kind of
I'm to the point.
Yeah. I'm saying we're both to the point, and I kind of like to understand people on a deeper level. So doing this podcast gives me a platform to form relationships in a way that's more authentic to me. Because honestly, just going out to someone, kind of doing the hey, and you don't really know, like that's not really. I mean, it's kind of how the social norms, but I don't really like it. I kind of like this,
right?
It's like, and then I get to kind of identify someone who I can already think I would really enjoy having a conversation with, and just have them on like we're doing now, So that's cool, man. So dude, my next question to you is I'm curious because I heard you talking about this in one of your podcasts. What is Podmatch? And how do you use it?
Yeah. So Podmatch is I always recommend, even before people start with me, that they go make a Podmatch profile. And it's a marketplace essentially of podcast guests that are looking for shows to be on and podcast hosts that are looking for guests. And so, I mean, I hate to compare it to like a dating app, but the owner of the company compares it to like Tinder for podcasting, Okay.
Podmatch.
You get to make your profile as a guest, and you get to create like your bio, put your headshot, create, it prompts you for all of this. Like, what are some topics you can speak on? What are some sample questions a host can ask you? What are links to other interviews you've done or press you've done? Your social media links. And then even like you can choose up to like 10 categories and podcasts you can be on. And you can then go find podcasts that you want to be a guest on, message them, submit yourself, and they can check out your profile and see if it's a fit. Even cooler than that is Podmatch will take those categories that you selected and recommend half a dozen shows that you might be a fit for every single day.
Oh, wow.
And so for a guest, it's amazing. And for a host, it really streamlines. It gives them another place that they can choose guests other than reaching out on Instagram, emailing, that kind of thing. It's a place where they already know there's people looking to be on podcasts. And even further than that, I think that Podmatch actually rewards hosts with some of their subscription revenue. So if you find a guest on Podmatch and go through the process of like, I booked an interview with this person, the interview was completed, Podmatch will pay you like $1. It's not a ton, but like if you only do your interviews through Podmatch, maybe it's like $1.50, I don't know. Right. But if you only do your interviews through Podmatch, you've paid for your StreamYard subscription.
Wow.
And so it's a really cool place, and it's also just a great community. I mean, Alex, the founder, has done an amazing job. He connects to everybody. I think he talks to every single person that makes a profile.
Wow.
And he's just the man. He's super well connected. He loves making introductions, and he's really done a great job of building community around Podmatch.
Wow. Dude, this is the first time I'm really hearing about Podmatch, and it sounds like an excellent platform. And the fact that they pay you, even if it's just $1, I mean, that's still cool. And I'm gonna have to, after this podcast, I'm gonna have to look into it and probably create my own account because it sounds good.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. I think if you make a profile and then you send it to somebody else and they make it, I'm pretty sure you get like your profile is a referral link. So
really?
I'll send you my profile.
Gotcha, man. It sounds good, man. And I'll sign up using your profile. That's cool, man.
Let's go.
All right. What advice would you give people who are struggling to get on podcasts or may aspire to be on a podcast? You have so much experience booking guests on. What are some things that people are looking from their guests, and how can people get on these platforms?
People just want unique stories, and they want a unique angle. They want some unique topics. Yes. And if you can, it's not always about reinventing the wheel. You don't have to be a thought leader that invented a whole new investing strategy. Like there's only so many investing strategies.
Yeah.
But if you can find a way to tell your story in a way that teaches people and adds value, you can be on a podcast. Mm-hmm. In terms of advice I'd give people, whether it's to start a podcast or go beyond podcasts, like just put in some legwork to make it happen. Like if you aren't ready to be on a podcast just yet, still go make the Podmatch profile. If you make that profile and just leave it there for a week and you come back, you're going to have like 10 invites to be on shows.
Wow.
That's going to be people that decided for you that they believe you're a good fit. And that should boost your confidence a little bit. And as it relates to starting a podcast, like, I haven't done it. I'm launching my podcast on Monday. It's going to be called Questions with a Podcast Booking Agent. And I was telling you, I got more active on LinkedIn and I started making videos. And I looked over at my partner. I'm like, we already have this audio, even though this is for LinkedIn. Just like put it out as a podcast.
Yeah.
And there's like, if you just. You mentioned that like part of what you were excited about in yourself is just that you stayed consistent. You showed up every day.
Yes.
Don't worry about who listens.
Yes.
Because in the beginning, it's probably going to be no one.
Yeah.
You can make mistakes. That's the great thing is like, it's very forgiving. You can change the name, you can delete an episode if you want, but like, if you have any desire to do any of this, just like go do something. And I always think about like, what's the simplest way that you could put out a podcast? And that's what I'm doing with this LinkedIn stuff is like, I don't want a show where I interview someone for 30 or 45 minutes and we talk about podcasting every week.
Yeah. And that's what I love about you, man. I can tell you have a genuine spirit of service. Like you generally just want to help people. I can tell because you don't care about the views. You don't care about the perception of success. You just want to do good for people. And I can recognize that in you. And I'll be honest, bro. Like when I started this podcast, there was some ego to it. I envisioned myself like, yo, I'm gonna interview Joe Rogan, and I'm gonna interview Jay-Z, and I'm gonna interview all my favorite hip hop artists and all these people. And as I started to actually reach out to them and some NBA players, no one was responding to me. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting humbled. Like, it's not just about, why the hell would they? Like, I had to, I really had to.
It takes time, bro. It took 10 years for Joe Rogan to be Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
I mean, he was already he was already on TV and a comedian and good at GB, but it took 10 years for Joe Rogan to be Joe Rogan,
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. It took time, and when I start to look at it from that perspective, I'm like, who am I to really even think that I should be in that position after doing like 20 episodes? Like, why the hell do I feel like I deserve that? And then not only that, like I mean, no offense, you're not a celebrity or anything, but this is fun. This is cool, man.
It's
like,
fun.
I'm enjoying this conversation, and like as I started doing more podcasts with regular Joes and just good spirited people, I'm seeing how fun it is to develop relationships like this. So I enjoyed that, and I like to hear that you're starting your podcast and you seem to have a similar intention of service. I'm excited for you. I didn't even know you had this because I knew you were booking a bunch of people on the podcast.
Oh, I'm not. It launches on Monday. Nobody knows about it. I haven't told anybody.
Okay, well, you got the exclusive, man. Thanks for sharing that, man. All right, man. So, my next question to you is like, what's the best thing about booking guests and like the worst thing about booking guests? Like, like what kind of like, what's like that feeling that makes you want to keep doing it? And like sometimes, what are some cons that you're like, maybe this isn't as fun as I thought? What are the pros and cons?
I always, because I came from music, I compare musicians to entrepreneurs. Like I look at them as their talent. And so in music, like what are the levels of success? It's having a gold album. It's selling out Madison Square Garden. It's not even headlining Coachella, but being on Coachella, getting on to festivals and stuff like that. And so as much as I love being paid to do what I do, what gets me excited is not making a sale. It's when I get someone on like a top 50 podcast. That's like getting them on a festival, I've had people on, the first big win I had was having someone on Bigger Pockets, and that took like 2 years or 2.5 years or something. And but that was my goal from the start. Like I'd love to have someone on Bigger Pockets. I learned from Bigger Pockets. I love the community, and it's the biggest real estate podcast. And then it was like, what's the next one? I had someone on Motley Fool Money, and people that don't know Bigger Pockets, everyone knows Motley Fool if they understand that thing.
Sure.
So like, that's been really cool. And a couple of weeks ago, I had one of my clients on Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving.
Yeah.
And
That's cool.
That book was like the original blog was huge for me in my personal development and years ago. And so that was like, that's probably the most exciting I've been is having someone go, be on Mark Manson's podcast and be in the studio with them while they were doing the interview.
That's so cool.
So that stuff's fun.
That's awesome. Yeah.
In terms of, downs, you just can't make everyone happy. And that's just is what it is. There's only been like a handful of times where someone was maybe rude to me. A host I reached out to or a producer, someone was rude to me.
Yeah.
But I just have to remember, like, there are 1,500 other hosts that were happy to work with me, Yeah, I can't be upset that 4 of them were not, that just is what it is.
Yeah. And I would also think in contrast to the music industry, like getting people on the Motley Fool or maybe Mark Manson's podcast is much easier to do than trying to get some artists who isn't as talented as they think they are on top of Coachella.
Yeah. Well, that for that reason, I very specifically don't work with people in music. I had some people initially come to me and they're like, hey, I'm working with this hip hop artist out of Houston. Like, can you get them on podcasts? I'm like, 1, I don't want to take their money. And 2, if they think they're going to be on Breakfast Club, they're like, it's not happening, and I don't want that pressure put on me, so I'm just not doing it.
Yeah. And then, because then they will come in with unrealistic expectations, and then you kind of start getting gaslighted, like, hey, you're not doing your job. And it's like,
exactly,
you're not that good, and then it's a battle of the egos. And I hear that. All right, man. I also just curious to learn, man. So, you got your booking agency off the ground, and you're about to start your podcast, which is awesome. I definitely would like to hear more about that. I'm looking to see your journey in that. I'm curious to learn, like, do you have any long-term visions with your agency and with your podcast? And if so, what are they?
I just really like being able to support talented people. I don't need to have like a 50 agent agency. I mean, if I could have a small team, that'd be fantastic. So I make a living for myself. I can provide income for other people. I do envision there's going to be a time where like my real estate investing is going to require more time than the podcast booking agency. And that's okay. But like, even then, if I continue down this road, I could always have like 10 people, that I'm still putting my resources to work for. That's something that I want to be able to do even as I get busier with other things, is build up relationships and be able to utilize those to help people. I mean, there's, the client that I had on Mark Manson's podcast was Brandon Novak, and he was from Jackass and Viva La Bam, and he was on opioids for 20 years, and now he's 9 years sober and has 7 recovery homes and a recovery center. I just like being able to help him get out there and tell his story, because when I say his name, he's not like an A-list celebrity. When I say his name, though, everyone's like, I know who that is. I'm like, he was the guy that was really fucked up on Viva La Bam. I'm like, oh yeah, that guy. Everyone just remembers that old version. And I like being able to show that, like, he overcame that, and you can, addiction is a losing battle, but there are ways to win. And that's, I like being able to support what he does. And I always want to be able to support what he does, even if the podcast booking agency isn't my main priority 5 years down the road,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious. I love your willingness to share stories and put people more in a positive light. It's kind of why I started this podcast. I'm just kind of curious, where do you feel like that passion to put other people in a good light come from? Because I don't really hear that a lot. I don't know too many podcast booking agencies. That doesn't seem like a common thing, but you seem like you're doing it to put other entrepreneurs in a spotlight. Do you ever wonder where that passion comes from, or why you're so passionate about putting other entrepreneurs or talent in a positive light?
I started booking concerts because I wasn't good enough to be in my cousin's band. Like, I just wanted to contribute. Like, I wanted to support them. And sometimes support, like, you don't always have the ability to support people the way you want, but you can always put in the time and the effort and whatever you can. And I was like, well, I can go book a hall and set up a schedule and let bands play. Like, I can do that.
Yeah.
And that just turned into like a career of always supporting talented people. And one of the things I did in music was the music conference and festival. And it was not a big festival of like all headliners. There might be 2 or 3 big names in the entire weekend, but hundreds of regional artists and baby bands and local bands. And the whole idea was giving them the information so that they can turn their hobby into a living, or at least attempt to. I mean, not everybody can, but I think that like kind of got me into that got me ingrained in a form of education before I even understood I was curating education for people. And my role in that is I'm not the musician and I'm not the thought leader. But I have time and resources I can use to help those people. And so that's kind of what all of my jobs have always been, even down to being a nanny. I was just there to help the mom with the 4 kids. Like my job, I mean, I'm not really an assistant. I feel like I'm a little more qualified than that, but I'm there to support people.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of like your ultimate goal, whether you're being a nanny or your booking agents or even your podcast, or that example of what you're telling me in LinkedIn, you're just, hey, what would you like to hear from me? Oh, okay, cool. I'm gonna help you out. It's all in the spirit of service, which is awesome. My last question for you, Spencer, is what have you learned about yourself from doing this booking agency? You've connected with hundreds of entrepreneurs and had the pleasure of putting them on different podcasts. As a result of doing that, what have you learned about yourself?
I used to be someone that I really need some encouragement to try something new. It wasn't that I didn't think I wasn't capable of something. It was more that, am I qualified to do this? Am I qualified to take money from somebody to go do this thing when I'm not sure I can do it? And when someone suggested to me that I get like entrepreneurs booked on podcast with my experience in music, I was just like, oh, I can totally do that. And I immediately, I drove home 15 minutes later and sat down my computer and just started cataloging podcasts. I'd never had a time in my life before where I was just immediately like, yes, I can do that. And I should be paid to do that. And so this is really over time, like even when I was doing it, it was imposter syndrome. There was companies that have been doing this for 10 years before me. I'm like, I bet they know more than I do. I bet they do this better than me. I don't think they've booked people on the shows that I've booked people on in terms of size. Maybe some, but I've really been able to develop my confidence and understand that like I do have a nuanced understanding of something that a lot of people don't. This past year I recorded the first draft of a course that I'm putting out, which I never thought I would put out a course. I never thought I had any intellectual property worth putting out there. Same thing with the LinkedIn stuff. Like I was struggling for a few months to put out content and I didn't enjoy it because it was like, I don't know what people want to hear. And then once I just asked, what do you want to hear? It all came like that. It was not hard for me to record those videos. I did it all in an hour. And it's just things like that. Like sometimes you just got to jump in and try something. And if you never put it out, that's fine. But like, if there's something you have any type of nagging to do, even if you're dragging your feet all along the way, just go try and you're going to figure something out and maybe find out you like it. Maybe you find out you don't like it. And that's okay. But there's a lot of things that we just choose not to do based on the fear of other people. And one, if you just try, they're never even going to know that you did it. And when it comes to putting out content and stuff, the reality is the first time you put out something, nobody's going to see it anyway, except for your friends. So just don't feel so much shame or guilt or fear. Just don't be scared to try things, you know?
Yeah, beautiful message, man. Overcoming imposter syndrome seems to be like a lifelong journey that people are constantly going with. I've definitely had my problems of doubt, and I still do, quite frankly. But I feel like for me, doing this podcast has kind of opened me up to the possibilities of what you can do and what and what's possible. And it's incredible to hear the growth that you have came from doing this booking guest, because I'm sure when you started this booking agency, you probably weren't thinking about creating a podcast, or you probably weren't thinking about creating a course, but the skills and the confidence that you have developed as a result of booking a bunch of guests has allowed you to get to where you are today, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time learning about it and doing the best I can. And I know that the time I've spent has given me some specialized knowledge.
Yeah. Awesome, Spencer. So, for people who would like to learn more about you, or even perhaps reach out to you on social media, how can they do that? And is there anything that you would like to promote on this platform?
Yeah, so So it's gonna the podcast drops on Monday, and it's called Questions with a Podcast Booking Agent. And I'm active on Instagram. It's just my name, Spencer Carpenter. LinkedIn, same place, Spencer Carpenter. And if you want to find our website, it's outlieraudio.com.
Awesome, man. Well, Spencer, it was a pleasure having you on. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. And I wish you best of luck with all your endeavors, including your new podcast and your booking agency. So keep up the good work, man. And I'll definitely stay in touch.
Thanks for having me on, Ike.